point, make sure they're not in the immediate reach of children. One of the things are Legos. Quite dangerous, yeah? Legos. You know the Legos? Yeah? So you, my dear respected young brothers, I can see you've got so many children. Make sure if you've got a more little one, yeah, maybe you know what to do, but if you're playing with the Lego, make sure every single piece that you can see, take it and put it back into the shelf. Yeah? Because your little one who is only just been crawling may go there, and it's very common, I'm sure you know as parents, at some stage of their development, they like to put everything to their mouth. That's how they kind of analyze their environment. You also need to check stuff like, believe it or not, even the food that we give them, things like grapes, al-inab. I myself have seen a poor child who choked from grapes given by his mum, to the point that his heart and breathing stopped, the so-called cardiac arrest. So make sure if you're going to give a very young child grapes, inab, especially some of the grapes have got a decent size, that's the perfect size that can lodge in a child's throat. So if you are going to give it to him, make sure you cut it into 4 pieces with its length, yeah? To minimize the chance of choking. Likewise, sausages. It's again a perfect size for a sausage to lodge in a child's throat. So maybe you need to think about cutting it into quarters, أرباع. فالعنب إيش السوسيج هذا؟ سجق مش كده؟ الله نسينا العربي. So these are things to be aware of. Now, that's the risk of choking. There is something that is even more dangerous. So the kids can choke on it, but there is also an additional harm from it. You really need to be, I would say, remove this completely from the reach of the children, which is the so-called button batteries. معروف لديكم البutton batteries هي بطارية لكن تشبه الكوين. The danger of button batteries is that it's not only that the children can choke on them, but button batteries, as soon as they lodge in their, even if they escape the breathing, if they lodge into their food pipe, esophagus, the medical term, the food pipe, they can cause serious burns, erosions to these food pipe, and that can happen within minutes. Within minutes, and I do mean that. So if you actually believe your child has, I hope it doesn't happen, has swallowed a button battery, you need to phone an ambulance immediately, because time counts with button batteries. Yeah? Lastly, there's something that has only recently been highlighted to us as doctors. In certain toys, there is something called strong magnets. And you will find that in toys, if they swallow one of them, it's just the same as any foreign object, but the problem is if they swallow a couple, more than one. What happens is they go inside their body, and then because they are really strong magnets, they will still link to each other. So imagine if they are anywhere in their gut or in their whatever lungs, they will pull the whole tissue inside and just rip everything to get attached to each other. Does that make sense? Yes? Right. So these are examples. Lollipops. I mean, you can't stop our kids from having lollipops. But please be sure that you teach your children not to have the lollipop in their mouth and run around. This is extremely dangerous. Does that make sense? Teach them also not to eat and run around, because they kind of lose their control of the swallowing. And we talked about grapes, talked about sausage, nuts. Very commonly they choke on nuts. Yeah? And popcorn, and actually popcorn, if they do choke on popcorn, removing that is a bit tricky because it just breaks. If you want to, if they come to us and you want to remove the popcorn, it is very difficult, similarly nuts. So these things, if they do choke on, it's more tricky to remove because they don't come up as one object. So be aware of them. Okay, so it is from the Sunnah. In fact, some of the scholars say it's far, but obviously I can't comment on that. If you drink, you sit down. So I will advise, as a doctor, teach your children to sit down when they're drinking and eating. It greatly reduces the chance of choking. Stop them from running around, okay? Now, if you can't eliminate all these hazards and you think your child is playing with the Lego, I mean, they will have to play with them, make sure they are within your sight or someone else who is, grown up enough is around the near vicinity of them. And that is because choking can be silent. Don't assume that even if you are upstairs you will hear something. You may not hear anything. So make sure you are around. Okay. What can we do? If, and I ask Allah it doesn't happen, if you do witness a child who is choked, you need to break this to one of three scenarios. Okay? And we will start by the worst scenario, and we will work our way through the less serious scenario. Obviously, scenario number one, if the child is unconscious, meaning by the time you have discovered that they have choked, they are already unconscious, right? You need to phone an ambulance, 999 immediately, and if you are trained to do basic life support, the so-called CPR, chest compressions and breathing, you need to start that. I'm not going to discuss this because it's a whole spectrum of a different talk. So that's the end of this more serious end of the spectrum. Okay. If the child is conscious, there is one of two things, which is scenario 2 and scenario 3. They may be able and they may still retain a strong, effective cough. Yes? We clear on this? إذا كان الطفل ما زال يستطيع أن يسعل يكح. If the child has still got a strong, effective cough, all what you do is you just encourage him or her. You don't need to do anything. Never attempt to insert your finger and try and fish a foreign body that you can't see. Why? Because you may push it further. If it is something that is really close, and it's very unlikely that they will be that distressed with something that is only here in their mouth, if it is something that you really can get hold of, by all means do it. But don't do blind searching for a foreign object. You can cause more harm than good. If they are coughing, just encourage them to cough, support them, be next to them, and their natural reflexes are likely to expel the foreign body. Or they will eventually end up in scenario number 3, which is they are not unconscious, but they don't have an effective strong cough. Or even worse, you can tell that they are coughing, but there is no sound. That means there is even no air movement. Does that make sense? Yeah? This is the point whereby you need to do what we call as doctors the 5 back blows and the 5 abdominal thrusts. What's your name, son? You're half asleep already. What's your name? Hassan. Come. Now, I'm going to teach you how to do the 5 back blows and the 5 abdominal thrusts. But you need to understand, the idea is the same, but the way you do this differs by age. Someone like Hassan, yes? Someone like Hassan, I ask Allah it doesn't happen, but let's say if he is choking and he hasn't got an effective cough. The way you deliver the 5 back blows in someone like him is you stand next to him. So that everyone can see. You stand next to him, you ask them to bend forward, and you give them with the palm of your hand 5 blows to the back, upper back. And you are, imagine you are pushing forward because you want to push the foreign body that is here to come out of the mouth. And that's why you bend them forward. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And every time you do the back blow, you're looking because it might come out. If it did come out, don't carry on. The poor child. Okay, that's the 5 back blows. What's next? The 5 abdominal thrust. Tummy thrust. Like that. Right? So you stand behind them. You can make a fist like this. And you give them 5 abdominal thrusts. You are trying to increase the air as if you are trying to build some air inside the chest to help them expel that foreign body. Does that make sense? Does that make sense? You understand why we do this? Yeah? So it's inside, upwards, 5 times. And again, you're looking. If it comes as the first one, don't carry on. Okay, what happens? I've done 5 and I've done 5. Nothing happens. You carry on and ask someone else at this stage to call the ambulance. Are we clear on this? Yes. Jazakallah khair, Hassan. May Allah bless you. If we're talking about a little one, let us say a 1-year-old or a so-called infant, the concept is the same, but that's the idea of how you would deliver them. You know, they are tiny, so don't go with your whole fist and thrust them. You can just hold them in your hand as like this, their heads slightly down, and give them the 5 back blows while you're looking. You can put them, for example, on your thighs, and just give them the 5 back blows, and then turn them round, and instead of, depending on the size, you can just guess, there's no hard or fast rule. If they're too tiny, maybe you just need to use 2 fingers. And you can even give that straight through their chest. You're not helping them to breathe, you just want to build pressure from inside to push that foreign body out. So you can do that 5 times like this, or if they are slightly bigger, maybe you can just use your entire hand. Does that make sense? Yes? 5 and 5, if it didn't come out, call an ambulance. If they become unconscious while you are doing this, you go back to scenario number 1. Are we clear on this? Jazakumullah khair. Any questions?